So guys, what if Naruto x Rias x Gabriel x Akeno movie? Rias Grimori was quietly sitting at the windowsill of her family's mansion in the world of the living, staring out at the moon in a contemplative fashion. She was troubled and sad, which was strange considering that ever since she was a little girl, the redhead had received everything she wanted, no questions asked. Okay. Some questions were asked by her parents when she ordered manga by the dozens. What? It wasn't her fault that they were good. Shokugeki no Soma was the best. Her trouble lay in the form of being lonely. It wasn't as if she was alone per se. She had her family with her, consisting of her cis-con older brother, Grafiane, her parents and their peerage members as well as the servants and maids, all of whom loved her dearly for her kindness and gentle heart. The girl sighed, brushing her crimson-red hair before gently placing it behind her shoulder. But what she wanted, what she truly yearned for, was a friend, not a relative who could understand her. She wanted one that would chat with her whenever they could, talking about random things under the sun, definitely crack jokes in order to make her smile when she was sad, to make her laugh when she cried. She wanted someone to pick her up after she had fallen, but just after both of them shared a laugh together over the situation, Rias wanted to spend the nights huddled together with said friend, sleeping in each other's rooms and just playing or chatting until the sun came up. Sona Citri filled up on one of those many slots she had in her heart, but she just hit the bare minimum. The glasses-wearing girl was a shut-in who preferred to stay in her own house to read large and musty tomes, choosing to expand her knowledge instead of hanging out with Rias. Now that she thought about it, Sona was more of an acquaintance than a friend really. Whenever they were together, only Rias would speak and Sona would hum or grunt softly in response to her words before an awkward silence would lapse between them, usually ending in Sona picking up another book to bury herself in and Rias sighing in a disappointed fashion. Games of chess against the girl were fun, but after playing the classic strategy board game with Sona hundreds of times, with them usually ending in ties, it was getting on her nerves just how repetitive every match was. Rias supposed that she had tried her best to form a friendship with the girl and would now leave their relationship to the future to decide. The reasoning she had begun to have such thoughts. Not too long ago, she had received a set of chess pieces from her older brother, courtesy of one of the Yondai Mao, Ajuka Beelzebub. The pieces were rare, in that only higher-ranking devils could get them. Named evil pieces, the intention was to use the pieces to increase the population of devils by reincarnating those willing to turn to devilhood or those dead, and they apparently held the power to bring that recently deceased back to life and turn them into members of her peerage. It didn't really matter if they were deceased or not, but the point was that she wanted to use them to get the friends she so desperately wanted. She had yet to use one, but was itching to reach over and grab one to make a new friend. That was her current problem. She couldn't just pick out to a random person and force them to become her friend. That was both socially and morally wrong. Her bright turquoise eyes met the round and pale yellow moon, staring wistfully at the glowing circle that hung in the darkness. The night sky was clear of clouds and the glowing orb was surrounded endlessly by glittering stars, the sky glimmering dimly like black silk under light. It was irritating that her devil vision took away the darkness, making everything look semi-bright as if it were daytime. At times like these, it kind of ruined the melancholic and reflective mood she had. Curse her perfect eyesight. Gazing down from the moon to the forests that were beyond the boundary, she realized that the night was awfully silent, with the animals that were in the nearby forest all asleep. The whole estate that belonged to the Grimoires on the human realm was shrouded in darkness, with none of the lights were on, meaning that everyone in the vicinity was asleep, and she was the only one who was still awake. Glancing at the electronic clock at her tableside, she noticed that it was already 12 in the morning, if the blinking green lights were to be believed, but the little redhead still wasn't tired. She still had energy to burn and could stay awake for a few more hours. A pang of loneliness hit her heart and Rias turned back to the window. I wonder if she supposed she could play make-believe. Couldn't she befriend the one person, or thing, who always stayed up with her on such lonesome nights? She vaguely recalled reading books about how the moon was alive, or it held a rabbit, or a man. She was slightly certain it was a man or something along those lines. It couldn't hurt to try, could it? Desperation often led to interesting ideas and good things, she supposed. Unless you were stuck on an island without anything of worth, then desperation would probably have to be either starvation or self-mutilation and then cannibalism, not a good thing. Ignoring her thoughts about being stranded on a deserted island, She rushed to the closet and quickly yanked the doors open before kneeling down. Using the moonlight to search for her chest she kept hidden. Upon finding said chest, which was covered in a pair of bare panties and a few casual t-shirts, Rias opened the top up and uncovered the box which held her evil pieces, taking a random pawn before quickly returning to the windowsill and sat there, raising the glowing red chess piece up into the air and directly at the moon. The light coming from the moon cast a red shadow across her face, darkening her hair, but she didn't notice or care about it. She thanked the leader of heaven, whose name she could not speak lest she wanted an irritating headache, that no one was awake to see her act like a complete idiot. Taking a deep breath to steel her excited heart, she closed her eyes but still held the chess piece up in the air, and quietly kneeled before the leering lone eye in the sky. She hoped whatever entity in the moon could hear her pleas and would accept her sacrifice. Please, will you? 384,400 kilometers away from a hopeful little red-headed girl. Be my first friend, man in the moon. It's rather lonely being all alone. I, Rias Gramori, promise we'll be best friends and I'll talk to you every day. Well, not every day since, why no, you're the moon and you only come out at night, but please. Hear me out. A pair of mismatched eyes slowly opened, the darkness that greeted his eyes doing nothing to hamper the glowing red and black alongside the luminescent ringed purple. The blood red and ebony one with multiple tomos in them, shaggy white hair that gleamed gold from a certain angles under light, reached down to the nape of his neck, and the rest of his hair was spiky, jutting out in multiple positions, and his face was easily described as handsome. His clothes consisted of a large white cloak, a black collar that popped outwards, adorned with 6 magatama at the front of his collar. A pair of small horns, around the length of an average person's wrist to the tip of their pinky, sat on the corners of his forehead, directly above his temples, protected by his custom-made village protector. A third eye sat on his forehead, hidden behind the metal plating. However, this one was a mix between both of his eyes, a deep ringed red with 9 tomos. The man, who looked to be around the age of 18, radiated a calming aura. Despite his rather fearsome look, the man was one of the kindest people, with a heart of gold to boot, to have ever existed throughout all of humanity. He was Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto, otherwise known as Uzumaki. Hero, myth, god. The teen had faced off against the previous rabbit goddess of the moon, Otsutsuki Kagaya, alongside his brother in all but blood, Uchiha Sasuke. However, mid-fight with Kagaya, Sasuke had fallen to one of her powerful skills, struck down and killed by a rapid barrage of her godly punches she used alongside her Byakugan to form the ultimate Juken. Naruto had grieved briefly for the loss of his friend before returning to battle, Sasuke's death invigorating him against his battle with Kagaya. Eventually, the goddess lost to Naruto's abilities and his sly tricks, defeated by his indomitable will and unwavering spirit. As she lay dying, Kagaya had a conversation with Naruto, and found that his heart was the purest despite the hardships he faced in life. With that in mind, she requested him to carry on her son's will, to bring peace to the world. But for that to happen, it was something he agreed to do so, but she didn't mean it as a normal human. In order to bring true peace, Naruto had to sacrifice a large part of his life to do so. She wanted him to replace her, to become a god that would rule the lands with his heart and not his fists like she had. All he had to do was to consume the Shinju's fruit and seal the Jubi into himself in order to gain the powers she had also unlocked, alongside that of immortality, to live forever as the Jubus Jinchuriki. It was the greatest sacrifice to a man with everything to live for. To watch as your friends died, consumed by the sands of time. He would be unable to start a family unless he wanted to watch them wither while he retained his youth. Being in peak condition amongst a group of aging men and women, Naruto agreed, sacrificing his mortality to forever bring peace were evil to rise yet again. Kagaya smiled weakly before spending the rest of her strength on kissing Naruto on the forehead, her way of thanking him for stopping her from ending the world. Glad that she was released from her binds as an immortal goddess, she quietly passed on to the Pure Lands, where she would meet her 2 beloved sons. After eating the Shinju's fruit and sealing the Jubi back into himself, Naruto quietly retreated to the outskirts of the elemental nations in the ocean, not wanting to alert anyone of his newfound status, lest some of them get upset at the power he now wielded. Using his powers of flight, Naruto hovered above the corner of the elemental nations and forced the floor to rise up, creating a faux island. Using the abilities to him granted after consuming the forbidden fruit, he activated his Rinnegan and performed the Chibaku Tensai planetary devastation on the island, creating another moon and sending it off to space with a Shinra Tensai. With his speed, he easily caught up to the ball he blasted upwards, entering the flying mass by using Kamui the Sharingan had granted him. It was wise to note that Naruto solved the double moon issue the way he knew how, blowing up the first one and replacing it with his newer one. And so, no one knew of what happened to Uzumaki Naruto. Many believed that he was the one involved with making the moon disappear briefly that fateful night, before another suddenly replaced it, while others believed he died stopping Kagaya, sacrificing himself for the world. Despite being unable to find his body, his funeral was held in the Valley of the End. And every single able-bodied shinobi from every major and minor village came to attend his wake, to show their respects to the man who saved them from the rabbit goddess. The wake lasted for a full week before he was buried in his grave beside his father and mother's coffins. Although heartbroken, Hinata never stopped loving Naruto, and for some reason, began staying up late at night to watch the moon. All the way until her death, she had never gotten married or consummated with anyone. Wanting to show her love to Naruto by doing so, his face was carved onto the Hokage monument despite not being one, and instead of the Konoha symbol, the kanji for hero was instead carved onto his headband. No one ever vandalized Naruto's face, their respect for him passing on from generation to generation until the shinobi era came to an end and the continents shifted, removing any trace of the shinobi civilization. Now, however, he had awoken for the first time in millennia, awoken to the first voice he had heard in eons, to the voice of a little girl in need of a friend. That was strange, considering the last he checked, he was in space and had fallen into an unconscious meditative state in order to not die from boredom. Despite having the ability to rend the world in half, Naruto's old personality still retained in his godly form. So far, throughout the years, there were only two major wars that involved the world. They had not hit the point where it actually needed him to return to Earth, as that was if someone managed to get a hold of powerful relics belonging to a time long gone, and threatened the world with it. Excitement churned in his stomach at the idea of returning to the planet, wanting to see just how much had changed. Well, that was either excitement or the fact that he had been starving for ages. Immortality had its benefits, he supposed, though it had been a very long while since he had tasted ramen. Snapping his fingers, he decided. Naruto supposed that there was no harm in paying the girl a visit, perhaps even befriend her, though he couldn't bear the thought of seeing a friend grow old and wither. He supposed that he could make an exception for a lonely child in need of someone. A smile cracked onto his stoic face. She did seem to remind him a lot like a boy who dressed up in an orange jumpsuit, proclaiming he would be the leader of his village. All she needed was a friend, just like the boy did. He instantly found her location, her wish somehow traveling through space despite space being a vacuum. The evil piece she had used acted like an amplifier, sending a small amount of evil towards Naruto from her location, allowing him to pinpoint her location. He figured that the girl had no idea that she was in the possession of an artifact capable of emitting such a dreadful feeling, and even if she knew, Naruto was still powerful, just much more slower due to not moving for a long time. Using an ability he had practiced in his first few years of solitude, Naruto tested out his Yomatsu Hirasaka for the first time outside of the moon. Yomatsu Hirasaka, he croaked, his voice slightly raw from suddenly being used. A square doorway opened up before him and Naruto stood up, his joints feeling rather creaky and his muscles atrophied from decades of disuse. It was no matter. He could easily regain his former body by training. It wasn't as if he was lacking in time. He grinned and walked towards the rectangular portal slowly. Now, let's see this Rias Grimori who's in need of a friend. Rias stared at the moon hopefully, wishing that something would happen. Suddenly, the moon seemed to glow brighter, only for a split second. But afterwards, nothing happened. She sat there, waiting for a minute, then two, just sitting there, waiting for anything to happen. Anything. Come on. Please. Please. Rias sighed dejectedly, and dropped her head downwards, her arm falling as well. Great. She knew she should have gotten her hopes up. It would only bring more disappointment if she had. She should have trusted those musty old books that Sona loved to read, always filled with ridiculous stories about rabbits hiding in the moon. Huh, I never realized how bright that damn thing was. Rias blinked and slowly tilted her head, looking right out of her window. There, sitting on the edge of the roof, legs hanging precariously off the side while he sat on red tiles next to her window was a dashing man, who was originally staring at the moon, now turned his head over to his right shoulder to look at her. "Hello, Rias-chan," he grinned. "I am the man in the moon and I am here to be your friend." Rias' jaw hung loosely as she tried to process the information, that someone had indeed come to befriend her, from the moon no less. Naruto had masked his presence before arriving onto the roof, where he saw a tiny hand sticking out of the window holding onto a crimson chess piece. It was probably for the best that he hid his power. No need to let the girl know that he was practically a god in the flesh. It would also be great that she wouldn't tell anyone that he could do all sorts of things. She'd probably end up in an asylum for spouting such crazy ideas. "My, you've got beautiful red hair," he commented, admiring the way her hair glowed under the light of his home. The girl seemed to register his compliment and flushed slightly under his strange gaze. Stretching his hand out for Rias to shake, he smiled and introduced himself. "Uzumaki Naruto, at your service." The girl sent her hand out for him to shake as well, shaking and stuttering violently, still in disbelief that a man had actually come from the moon to befriend her. Rias Gramori, pleased to meet you." Their hands made contact and Rias immediately began to calm down, his presence slowing her quick-beating heart down to its normal pace. "Call me Naruto." He smiled and stared back at the moon. "After all, we're best friends, aren't we?" "After all, we're best friends, aren't we?" Suddenly, his head snapped back and he gave Rias a chagrined look. "Also, I feel like I should have mentioned early that I am a god." If Rias had been drinking water, she would have spat it all out that instant. God. This wasn't good. If her new best friend was God and he found out she was a devil, she would totally be smitten straight into the depths of hell, or was it hell's hell? She didn't know. That was still something she wanted to figure out. He nodded carefreely, as if the fact that he was a god didn't matter to him at all. Rias nearly screamed at his expression, tugging at her hair. "Cool huh? Be you, but I am a devil. Aren't you gonna, why no, smite me or something?" Naruto scratched his head and frowned in confusion. "Well, I wouldn't go as far as to call you a devil. I mean, you're super adorable." She flushed at the compliment. "But I wouldn't smite you just because you misbehave. I used to misbehave all the time and they called me names too." His face morphed into one of mock hatred, pretending to be the villagers from so long ago, like scoundrel, parentless scum, demon child, and my personal favorite, the incurable orange plague. Obviously, he didn't know about the existence of devils, angels, both fallen and pure alike, but Rias didn't know that either. Having just awoken from his slumber proved to be a hindrance due to the fact that he needed to catch up in many years of history. Choosing to question him about the names he had been called for another time, Rias slid her hands down from her face, pulling her face downwards in exasperation. "I am a devil, devil." She emphasized, but received a blank look from Naruto, who she guessed was still clueless. The girl then went on to have an in-depth talk with Naruto, who entered her room through the window and curled up at the foot of her bed like a cat, propping his head up onto his hands and staring at her as she educated him in hell, heaven, devils, angels, fallen angels and many more things. Sometime during the educational trip, Naruto blinked and realized that Rias' clothes, her cute red pajamas, had been replaced with that of a rather promiscuous teacher's outfit. Her nose was home to a set of thin glasses that gave her a sexy librarian vibe and her hair had been done up into a ponytail. A blackboard had appeared behind her and she was furiously speaking, using a long stick to smack at different points of the board as she explained at a rapid pace. By the time she was done, she realized that Naruto had been distracting himself by creating random objects out of thin air using Banbutsu Sozo, piling the bed with an assortment of items that were created out of the boredom of Naruto's imagination. Rias' right eye twitched rapidly at the casual use of his godly powers, but it gave her a good idea of what his character was. He didn't seem to care if you were someone important or an everyday Joe, someone powerful or weak. As long as you were a good person, he was more than happy to make friends with you. She supposed she could educate him another time, choosing to spend time with her newfound friend in order to get to know him better. However, out of the heap of junk that had been created throughout her lecture, there were some items she identified, such as an oar, a stuffed bear with, for whatever reason, a platypus beak standing up on its hind legs, and a castle made entirely out of cards. But the one that stood out was the one he had held in his arms, supported by his unmeasurable strength due to the fact that it was made entirely out of marble. It was a beautifully detailed bust of a gorgeous woman, starting from the very top of her large breasts. With a kind face, a soft and shy smile playing on her round lips, eyes lacking pupils and a Heim haircut, she was the type of woman that would emit an alluring atmosphere that would unintentionally steal the attention of men from their wives. The marble figure did a fine job entrancing Rias as well, the girl being unable to break her sight from the grace of her face. Not realizing that Rias had stopped in her lecture, Naruto's gaze was set furiously upon the woman's prepossessing features. His blue eyes going wet from staring so hard, as if he was trying to remember every last detail of the bust's visage to get everything perfectly in order. She watched as he gently trailed his thumbs over her face, running them across her white cheeks gently as if indulging himself in the last touch of a lost lover. The tip of his index finger glided tenderly across the smooth material that replaced her skin, caressing what was her jawbone. Sorrow spilled from his eyes briefly before he shut them, hiding his tears from the world as he took deep breaths and began releasing the melancholic feeling from his body through slow exhalations. Ever since that day that he had eaten that fruit, he tried his best to distract himself from the fact that he left someone important to him behind, more than likely heartbroken. It had gone well, keeping the burden off of his heart, but it finally caught up to him. Although Rias knew little to nothing about Naruto so far, it was obvious that he was old, very much older than he looked, and due to the longing looks he gave the unmoving carving, it was obvious to the little redhead that he knew the woman from another time period. Perhaps she was his wife, a lover, or just a very good friend, one that he didn't want to part with, but had to due to the limits of mortality. Rias stood there, already reverting back to her original clothes, sharing his sadness despite not knowing what the sadness was about. After a minute of silence, Naruto's conflicting eyes slowly opened and a smile grew on his whiskered cheeks. "Wherever you are, I hope you are doing just fine, Hinata-chan," he murmured, unheard to Rias, and slowly setting the statue onto the ground, careful not to wake the inhabitants of the house up. "Now, where were we, Rias-chan? You said something about devils." Rias, although irked and vexed by Naruto's constant childish behavior, found herself smiling silly when she realized he cared not for his position as a god, blushing as the man offered her a bouquet of blood-red roses that went with her hair, a stupid grin on his face. She supposed that this was what a friend truly was, one that had shown multiple sides of himself to her in one night. End flashback. Men and women stared in confusion as Naruto darted from window to window in the busy street, earning gasps of horror as he literally jumped over the hood of moving cars to get to the next street, unable to contain his awe at seeing new things. He gasped and flinched away from a television, not expecting the new cooking anime to pop up. On screen, Yukihira Soma was preparing the meal against the 10th seat in God's Tongue. Nakiri Arena, his final battle against her in a shokugeki with the main focus as noodles. Pulling up the sieve containing the ramen strands, Soma quickly dried them off by flicking his wrist, removing all the excess water in the sieve. Tossing the bundle of ramen into the bowl, he twisted his body and grabbed the handle of the ladle that had been in the boiling broth, gently pouring the fragrant and cloudy soup into the bowl with the ramen. Grabbing the previously chopped spring onions, he sprinkled them over the ramen, topping it off with 2 fish cakes that looked rather similar to the man who was drooling all over the window. Soma smirked as he served the bowl towards Arena, pulling the cloth he wore as a headband off of his head in a single tug. Turning his back to her, Arena growled at the sight of his confident stature. Picking up the spoon aggressively before dunking it into the broth and taking a sip of the body-warming broth. Her cheeks darkened heavily, tears forming in her eyes at how the broth tasted. Unwilling to admit defeat, she grabbed the chopsticks and skillfully picked a few of the thickened noodles up into the air, watching as it taunted her by gleaming in the light, showing off its well-coated sides. Using the spoon once again, she unhappily picked up a Naruto and filled the spoon with broth and chopped spring onions. Yet again, chomping hard onto the chopsticks, she quickly released the noodles into her mouth before pouring the steaming soup into her mouth. She paused, eyes widening in shock, erotically moaning. Her clothes were blasted off of her body extravagantly, the beauty shielding her bare flesh from Soma's sight, not wanting her rival to lay his eyes upon her womanly parts. "It wasn't much," Soma commented, winning the private contest between the two before the screen cut to an advertisement about the very same show. Having been starved of his favorite food for multiple lifetimes, Naruto didn't care if the ramen was real or not, choosing to assault the glass screen with his tongue. Hoa! Ramen! Rias could hear his cries from the other side of the road, the killer laughing loudly in her ruffled dress as people began taking photos and videos of Naruto licking the window childishly, attempting to get to the animated ramen behind the glass window. Naruto! Rias called out in mid-laughter, causing the man to turn to her with wide blue eyes, his tongue still hanging out of his mouth in mid-lick. Stop licking the glass, it'll get you real ramen. Quicker than a greased hog, Naruto had dangerously run through traffic again just to reach Rias, kneeling before her like a puppy awaiting his treats for performing his newly learned trick. The girl dragged her friend down the street, uncaring about the looks people gave her as she skipped down the sidewalk, pulling an excited-looking Naruto who was chanting ramen over and over again by his hood towards the nearest ramen stand she could recall, which was in a nearby mall. Luckily for Rias, the amount Naruto ate did little to her vast family fortune. She did look slightly chagrined as the owner of the ramen stand had apologetically kicked everyone out when Naruto made his order of 500 bowls of miso ramen and 200 of shrimp. Currently, the entire store was working on overtime, sending bowl after bowl towards Naruto, who mercilessly guzzled each one down like the starving god he was. Remember how I told you that I didn't have this heaven or hell thing back in my day? Naruto spoke as he swallowed a mouthful of noodles. Rias nodded, still in slight awe at the fact that Naruto transcended hell and heaven both, more than likely being older than anything on the earth, save for the planet itself. Their talk last night after Naruto's thing with the statue had amazed Rias beyond belief, and she had wanted to wake her parents up to inform them about Naruto's status. Unfortunately, Naruto would have none of it. Grabbing Rias around the waist, he pulled and sat her onto his lap, placing his chin on the top of her head as he explained why he couldn't expose himself as a god as of yet. Rias sat through the explanation with a red face, embarrassed that Naruto, her best friend, was treating her like a child. Granted, she was a child, but still. I think I figured it out. Rias' eyebrow rose up in confusion at his words, catching her off guard. About how heaven and hell came to be. Hold on to your butts, cause I am about to. He paused to down a bowl of broth, wiping his mouth with his jacket's sleeve. Blow your mind. Rias smirked at his words, finding them to be rather strange for someone to use. Naruto had a way with words that, well, he had a way with words and that was about it. Okay, so originally, back in my time there was only the Pure Land, which apparently, you would go to whether or not you were a scumbag in life. I don't know what you do there, but that's where you'd go after death. But you'd have to go through some kind of middle plane of existence first, which my sensei had experienced himself. He shrugged. Met his dead dad there or something, I can't really remember. Rias nodded and took what he spoke in, mentally drawing out a mind map as he spoke. Now, I'd like to think that as time went on, humans came up with religion. And then, I know this sounds really crazy, but since religion was so strongly believed in, it actually managed to alter the Pure Land, somehow splitting it and therefore creating heaven and hell. Rias gave him a slightly dubious look and Naruto rolled his eyes at her suspicion. Hey, I said it was going to sound crazy, but when you've personally fought a goddess to the death as a mortal, you'll learn that not everything is impossible. Besides, this is all just a guess. Rias admitted defeat to that, having heard his story about how he fought a goddess with his friend who perished in battle. Judging by Naruto's face during the tale last night, she figured that he was being serious due to the hard look he had in his eyes at the memory. Still, she found it surprising that he held no ill will to the goddess, Kaguya, saying that she just was doing what she believed in. Just like him, both of them wanted the same outcome, peace, but had different methods of doing so. Where Kaguya wanted absolute destruction of humanity, Naruto wanted to preserve it, but the god admitted that he was saddened to find out that war still plagued the world, that people were still hurt through violence, rape, and all kinds of ways. He admitted that sometimes he wondered about the lives he would have saved from allowing Kaguya to destroy humankind. Saying that he often got the feeling that if he had allowed Kaguya to wipe away life on Earth, those that had suffered at the hands of evil wouldn't have suffered at all. The women who were raped wouldn't have experienced it if they never existed. War wouldn't run rampant through the Middle East if they never lived in the first place. Children didn't need to watch their parents leave the home and never return. killed in battles that could have been solved by peaceful talks. What kind of peacekeeper was he if he couldn't even keep the peace? Rias had smacked that out of his head fast, telling him that it wasn't him that was to be blamed. Although doubtful, Naruto thanked Rias for snapping him out of his funk before continuing with his story. Anyways, somehow the Pure Land must have split, and this is a long shot. Maybe, just maybe, during this split a few souls got loose through the cracks and managed to get themselves reincarnated and reborn as normal humans. I wouldn't be surprised, shit like that has happened way too many times to count when I was still a kid. Of course, they definitely wouldn't remember anything from the Pure Land or their past lives, that's for sure. Naruto recalled the Akatsuki members and those Kabuto had resurrected during the war, about how they seemed to never remember being in the Pure Land. He picked up another bowl and brought it to his lips, this time gently drinking the broth that fell into the black hole he called his stomach. A soft smile was hidden behind the bowl at the idea of. No, best not to get his hopes up. Quashing the brief flutter of hope, Naruto set the bowl back onto the table, absently thanking the woman that came up and collected the stack of bowls that Naruto had piled up on the counter. That's amazing. Rias rubbed her chin in thought, her mind map completed. The map spanned across a full section of her min she had cordoned off, a sign in front of the entrance to the room stating, or warning, that whatever logic she knew should be dropped upon entering, and her disbelief should be suspended. A bright neon sign took the space at the top of the door, the words Naruto blinking obnoxiously in bright orange. Well, that's 500 down, Naruto sighed, patting his stomach contently before he sat upright, grinning with a pair of worn chopsticks in his hands. Another 200 to go. You heard the man, the owner shouted to his chefs, who quickly went back to work. 200 more, stat. Rias grimaced, wondering if her family did, in fact, have the money to support Naruto's addiction to the noodle and broth combo. Maybe he could make more money using that creation power of his. The vast whiteness seemed to stretch on for miles and miles, an endless sea of white clouds surrounding the throne room of heaven. The center of the room held the large seat, made entirely of milky marble. The seat was grand, to say the least, in a simple way. The seventh heaven where God once resided was quiet, with only a single figure in the room enjoying the temporary tranquility before they would return to the other levels of heaven to join her brothers and sisters. Ever since God had died, she had been coming here, to sit alone in peace to ruminate, her hand twisted and dipped into the fluffy cotton, silently enjoying the feel of the clouds as thoughts ran through her head briefly. There had been so many of their kind falling from heaven, their emotions turning them into those who would sin and those who had sinned, into fallen angels. It wasn't their fault though, seeing as how they too were once human. And humans were full of sins, some able to control it better than others. Luckily, the population of heaven had been stabilized, with some of them having been reincarnated into angels through the brave saint system, and the occasional one had risen through the ranks, theirs wings increasing as they grew in power, yet retaining their kindness. One of them, having grown so strong, had gained the title as one of the seraphs a few lifetimes ago. Sitting upon the steps that led to the grand unoccupied throne of God in Caesar, she waited calmly. She had been doing so ever since she was still a human, before she had been reincarnated as an angel. It was her system, a habit she had developed whenever she had nothing to do. All she had done whenever she was bored was waited, and waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for, but she just wanted to wait. She whose heart was filled with unadulterated care and affection for one she knew not, the truest form of love residing deep within her bosom waiting to emerge. She whose love and mind transcended lifetimes, even if the reason for her love was but a faint blur at the back of her mind. She who, as a human, fell in love with the bright globe in the night sky, and yet again in her reincarnation as an angel, even if she couldn't figure out why had the moon caught her heart? She couldn't tell, but some said it had to do with her. Wherever you are, I hope you're doing just fine, Hinata-chan. Pale eyes that glowed just like the moon gently opened and 12 wings burst from her back in a show of grandness, as well as power. Twisting her head, she looked around the empty level, noticing that no one had called. Calming her irregular heartbeats, the pale-skinned beauty got up off the steps slowly, making her way barefooted through the sea of clouds. How strange, she could have sworn she heard someone, must have been her imagination. Shrugging, Gabriel took flight, her white eyes unblinking as she took flight, blonde hair billowing behind her from her intense speed. it was a surprise that her thin and short white blouse that was nearly being ripped off her body at the speeds she was traveling at hadn't accidentally released her endowed chest from its confines, not wearing a bra beneath her shirt due to the fact that it was more comfortable going commando. Actually, many of her brethren had actually fallen due to the fact that she unknowingly wore skimpy clothes all the time, with many of her male counterparts unable to keep their eyes off of her body, falling to the sin of lust. Luckily, most of them were able to resist watching her whenever she bent down to pick something up, choosing to look away and think happy thoughts or simply knock themselves out with a well-placed punch. Poor Gabriel didn't know why she was being surrounded by unconscious and bruised members of heaven. A tall figure clad in purple pajamas and mismatched, furry yellow slippers ran down the hallway silently, the large bush of red that sat upon his head. There was a string of quiet muttering as he zipped from door to door stealthily, pressing himself up against the wall to look inconspicuous, as if he were playing some kind of game. In his defense to looking silly, he had been playing a video game series that went by the name of Metal Gear Solid during his free time, and the game had proven that this was the most effective way of hiding, as no one ever spotted his character's naked snake, Solid Snake, whenever the bearded, one-eyed man hid around corner while he was navigating around the territory of the bad guys. It was a pity that the company making the game had gone to shit, and had started selling out and making games on phones instead. A real pity. He'd never forget Hideo Kojima and the work he'd put into the game, only to be sacked by his company for reasons that SearsX couldn't even think of seriously. That game made them money. Perhaps if the man were to accept or die prematurely, he could invite him into his peerage. Nevertheless, the reason he was sneaking around was because he had chanced upon his little sister Rias speaking to herself. Normally, this wouldn't warrant any type of suspicion from her sister complex older brother, as she could be read off a book, but the problem was that she was asking strange questions like, "Wow, did you really beat a giant sand monster by yourself? And why in the hell did he grow wings that looked like hands?" Now, that either showed that his little Rias was losing her mind, or that she was talking to something or someone who had entered her room via unknown methods. Normally, he would have acted on this immediately, but Rias had been looking much happier than before, whereas in the past she used to look slightly bored and would beg for Graphia to stay with her at night to talk aimlessly. She now wanted to go to sleep earlier than ever. After a full week of not wanting to spoil his beloved little sister's good mood, his curiosity had finally reached its peak, and now he just had to know who or what she was speaking to. Tiptoeing across to the next door just beside Rias' room and peeking his head out just a little from the door frame allowed SearsX to see the faint light shining from underneath her door. Still thinking that it was some kind of stealth game, the grown man decided to act like Solid Snake and rolled across the floor, clumsily banging into many of the walls due to his long legs getting tangled up. Inside the room, a pair of turquoise eyes rolled in exasperation. Pretending like he had just performed a perfect roll, SearsX popped upwards onto his feet and raised his hands defensively, sweeping his eyes across the hall to ensure that no one had seen him when he performed his poorly executed roll. After confirming that the coast was clear, he pressed his ear against the door and listened as the blurred mumbling from behind the wood became intelligible. What kind of panties should I wear today?" He heard Rias' adorable voice wonder aloud, and could already imagine her holding up a pair of cute striped underpants. A true sis-con, indeed. Despite those thoughts, SearsX's eyes twitched violently, but made no movements, as she could just possibly be talking to herself, and barging into his underage sister's room while she was changing her undies would inevitably land him in hot water with his sister, wife, father and mother. A situation a man in his high-ranking position would want to be caught dead in. How about the cute bear one? It was still a 50-50 chance that she was talking to herself, so SearsX still stood his ground. There was a brief pause, as if someone was responding. He could hear Rias smile as she spoke again. "Well, that's a given considering how much you like bears." With a resounding hiya, SearsX moved backwards and brought his leg upwards, kicking it forwards with all of his might. The door shot forwards, swinging inwards and slamming into the wall next to the door. "Nobody should be looking at my Rias-chan's panties." SearsX entered the room, eyes burning brightly, fists cocked and ready as he scanned the room, only to find the deadpan face of his sister staring back at him from the bed. Nothing seemed out of place, and she wasn't even doing anything related to panties. Could it be? Could she have known that he was sneaking around and eavesdropping on her? Her blank face answered all of his doubts. Impossible. He was as silent as silence itself. There was absolutely no way that Rias could have heard him. Playing Metal Gear Solid, at least 70% of the entire franchise beginning from Metal Gear, already gave him a one-up on many people. Perhaps Rias had some kind of trick that allowed her to know of his sneaking skills up her sleeves. And just what? She started as Rias' turquoise eyes began to narrow in, presumably, anger. Do you think you're doing? But where's the? He stuttered in confusion as he looked left and right, and the bare panties hello Rias-chan. What are you doing up so late? Sears tried the old changing the subject, but failed horribly. Oni-chan, what was that about bare panties? I don't recall mentioning anything about bare panties in your presence. The little girl tilted her head to the side, narrowed eyes burning holes through his face. If looks could kill, Sears would have already been sent to hell. Probably not, but nevertheless, bottom line was that he'd be dead. As his eyes went over to her hands, he noticed that they were tightly clenched and were slowly being raised up, already in preparation for knocking his head off of his shoulders. Were you, perhaps, eavesdropping on me? A miasma of darkness began forming from Rias' side of the room, and Sears gulped when Rias' entire body seemed to turn dark, her red locks flickering behind her sinisterly, with only the entirety of her eyes and hair lighting up in turquoise and crimson respectively. I'd suggest you leave, Oni-chan, Rias drawled in a creepy manner. Her cute voice seemed to echo throughout the room and when used in conjunction with her creepy drawl, made it more spooky, sending shivers down her older brother's spine. I'll be taking my leave now. I'll send someone to fix the wall and door tomorrow. Giving his sister a shaky grin, he waved goodbye to the little sister who was slowly getting up, not wanting to further agitate his little sister, lest he end up gargling on his teeth. Sears quickly bid his sister good night. Good night, Rias-chan. The sweating devil sped down the hallway, his stealth long forgotten. Rias allowed the effect to fade away and the little redhead rolled her eyes before getting off her bed to close the partially destroyed door and wall. But before closing, she popped her head out and looked left and right again before shutting it. Her thumb pressed the metal circle over the knob, and she nodded to herself as the distinct thunk sound was heard, alerting her that the door was locked. Behind her back, the space inside of her room began to distort and an open doorway leading to absolute darkness slowly opened up. Upon reaching the floor, the robed foot stepped out and a grinning Naruto popped his head out from the darkness, the rest of his body sans his legs still shrouded in darkness. Ahoy, Rias-chan, he cheerfully shouted, causing the girl to spin around with a wide smile on her cute face. How'd your brother respond to getting caught? Oni-chan got really frightened because I used the technique you taught me on him. Rias responded. She had indeed learned the trick from Naruto, who said that he learnt it from his mother the first and only time he met her. Rias' displeasure, who thought that Kushina had purposefully abandoned Naruto, was quelled when Naruto told her that Kushina did love him greatly, and that he had met her in his own mindscape long after she had passed on. Rias' smile had gotten larger when she heard that Naruto found his mother to be one of the most beautiful women he had ever laid his once blue now purple ringed eyes upon. Thankfully, in their brief meeting, she was able to convey to him all of her ungiven love. Apologizing for the horrible past he had where he was ignored by everyone and had no one to love him save for a handful of people, Naruto cared not for the years of solitude, and gave the woman a big hug before she returned it with double the ferocity. After sharing a brief laugh together, she enthralled him with a story of her past and how she met his father in school. She also taught him the trick she used when boys had bullied her in school about her hair and round cheeks. See, told you that it was scary for men. Probably gave him a minor heart attack when your hair started floating. Naruto gave a chuckle as the rest of his body emerged from the universal doorway he summoned. On his arms Naruto carried an array of bags, each with their own colors, decorations and sizes. He waddled forwards carefully as not to break anything fragile inside them. Where did you go? Shopping for technology? Rias asked with a tiny smile, making a jest at Naruto's wonderment towards the new age. Naruto pouted at Rias, causing the girl to break out in giggles. Dropping his sad act and allowing a smile to form on his face, he set the bags down and sat down with his legs crossed onto her carpet. Ha ha. Very funny Rias-chan. I was, in fact, at the moon. Rias raised an eyebrow, suddenly interested in what the bags contained. I seriously hope that you didn't bring aliens into my home. Oh Rias, you really need to stop watching those movers you tell me so much about. They are called movies, Naruto-kun, not movers, Rias corrected him with a smirk, to which the spiky-haired blonde tapped his finger at the side of his chin. Huh, could have sworn they were called movers, he muttered and shrugged to himself before going back to unpacking his bags. Rias sat beside him on the floor while she on the edge of her bed, swinging her legs in anticipation as Naruto poked his tongue out and shuffled through the bag, rummaging through the first bag's contents. Naruto allowed her curiosity to be satiated as he first pulled out a thumb-sized shard of a smooth black rock, rolling it in his palm briefly. Naruto tossed it up in the air and caught it as it fell back down with his index finger and thumb. Rias marveled at how the rock seemed to sparkle under the light, different minerals on its surface reflecting light at different angles, at varying levels of brightness. This, he handed the rock over to Rias, who obliged and took it from his pinch grip, is a piece of the moon I brought back with me. Really? Rias stared with interest at the piece of rock in her hands. This rock came from the moon. It was definitely something you didn't touch every day, and it was probably worth its weight in gold if sold to the right person. The lunar rock felt both smooth and coarse at times due to the numerous minerals embedded into it, and Rias thought it was definitely a cool souvenir. Oh my gee, Naruto huffed before he continued, it's a mineral, Rias, not a rock. Rias raised an eyebrow at his sudden change in demeanor. Nope, definitely a rock. Never mind, Naruto relented, that's a gift by the way, who knows? That might come in handy one day. Rias smiled, setting the fragment of rock onto her white sheets. Naruto then stood up as he began pulling out a flag from his bag, and Rias gawped as Naruto pulled out the distinct 50-starred flag of the United States of America. That wasn't the surprising part. What was surprising was that Naruto was pulling out a 100 centimeters long pole that followed the flag out of a 20-centimeter tall bag. What the, how are you doing that? Rias spluttered as Naruto continued to pull the flag's pole out. That shouldn't be possible, are you bending space? Hey, I told you, I am a god, I am pretty sure I can do anything I want, like, oh you know, creating the moon after I blew the first one up. Naruto waggled his eyebrows as he lifted the flag out of the bag and gently placed its end onto the carpeted floor while holding onto its middle. Speaking of the moon, this is America's flag. Rias rubbed her eyes wearily, having briefly forgotten that his best friend was quite literally a god and could do whatever he wanted to, even if it meant defying the many laws of the infinite universe. She briefly went into her mind and tossed that memory into the room in her head that she dedicated to solving Naruto. Yes, I can see that. Remind me why you have that again, Naruto-kun. They probably think some other country did it, but I stole it after I realized that they had placed it on the moon. Like, who does that? They come to my home uninvited, and I don't even get mad about it, but then they go ahead and claim it as theirs. Are you kidding me? Space was mine, completely untouched by man at the time save for me, but no, they just had to come to space and claim the moon as theirs. Naruto grumbled and crossed his arms beneath his chest grumpily. In a silly voice, he pretended like he was one of the astronauts. Hey guys, let's just disregard the fact that we have no idea if anyone lives on the moon and mark it as the Americans, huh? Rude pricks. Rias scratched her head as she listened to Naruto's tangent, wondering how he had known that they had even landed on the moon, but guessed that he was still half conscious at the time. The part of him that was awake was probably the part that watched over the world in case of impending doom, and that he was awoken due to the evil piece she had held up to the moon. Disregarding that question, she corrected him, I am fairly certain that the Russians got to space first. Yeah, and there's a reason they didn't land on the moon. Why no, it's cause they know better than to mess with Uzumaki Naruto. Sure thing, Naruto-kun, Rias giggled while Naruto propped the flag up against the wall. What else did you bring with you? Oh, right, before I self-exiled myself, I managed to retrieve that. I haven't touched it since I placed them on the moon either. Naruto had used his newfound godhood to steal various items before the incident with the moon came about. While picking up a few of these gifts, Naruto had also taken Madara's gunbai and cool samurai armor, all of Obito's masks, and a few of Akatsuki's signature cloaks. There were a few more things here and there that he had taken along with him before he left, but he couldn't remember much besides the important ones. He had sealed all of the items he had collected inside of the scroll for convenience. Naruto was certain that nobody, save for himself, was able to use any of these items, let alone get to them, as it require chakra to unseal from the scroll. So, what's inside? This and that, just some things that should never have been placed in the hands of humans, as well as weapons that bring destruction and death. Just the usual fun stuff you had to deal with in the past as a shinobi. Naruto was certain that a few items he had not picked up were somewhere else in the world, as a majority of them were probably hidden in places humans were unable to reach. I am not going to unseal this today, maybe another time. Returning to his scavenging, Naruto was interrupted as Rias asked him another question. I've wanted to ask you this for a while, Naruto, but why didn't you wake up during the World Wars, or when every other ruthless dictator was in power, and stop them? Naruto knew of their existence due to his partial awareness during his slumber, but had only recently been educated by Rias and read up about the history that had unfolded during his sleep. He learned of Germany's atrocities against the Jews in World War II, and what the Russians did to the innocent Germans after the war ended, how Stalin had many of his own countrymen killed during his tyrannical reign, and all of the new terrorist groups popping up left and right, causing absolute havoc to different parts of the world. Naruto lifted his ringed eyes from the backpack and scratched at his scalp. Well, that's a tough question that not many might understand and is quite hard for me to put into words. This might be long, so just bear with me. Leaning back, Naruto pressed his back into the frame of the bed and sighed. Looking slightly older than he did seconds before, the little redhead guessed that it had to do with some form of guilt, or something along those lines. Think of it like this: the reason I accepted godhood from Kaguya was to attain true peace, right? Rias obliged him with a nod. Well, during the first few years of my self-imposed exile in the moon, I realized that I wasn't capable of stopping all conflict or saving all lives. It was a foolish thought, really, and the only way of attaining that was through the infinite Tsukuyomi, or me, ending human life, conflict, be it small in the form of just the average people punching his fellow nobody, or large-scale situations like the world wars and all that other crap, wasn't just something I could stop. Even if I did stop it, they'd still harbor the same feelings they had before I stopped it, and everything would inevitably blow up just like it did for the shinobi. Rias noticed the frown on his face as he began pouring his heart out to her. People, humans, need to work together to solve a common problem before they can understand how to come together. They require something so much worse than each other to stop and fight against in order to forget their hostility to each other and to learn how to trust each other. Do you think that the 5 great villages were best friends before the whole palaverous event with the Zetsu, Kabuto and the Undead Army, Obito, Madara, the Shinju and Kaguya? Naruto's spiked hair followed along with his movements, shaking left and right as he did. The answer is a resounding no, but we became allies, friends, because of a simple, common problem. Correction, a common problem that could potentially kill all of us or trap us in some dreamland we can never escape from for all eternity. If Madara and Kaguya's failed attempts at trying to bring their version of peace have taught me anything, it's that true peace is completely unobtainable. It was painful to accept, but true. It was so long ago that the world was in peril, at its mercy at the hands of a crazed goddess, but once they were saved and time passed on, wars and endless conflict returned, a vicious, never-ending cycle. Naruto sighed again. So I decided that unless another Kaguya was going to spring forth, attempting to end all life on Earth or to destroy Earth completely, only then I'd have to step in. But until that happened, I would stay completely out of the spotlight. Naruto allowed his words to sink into Rias for a moment, before continuing. I mean, can you imagine what I'd have to deal with if I exposed myself to stop in my eyes minor wars? From then on, any problem, no matter how insignificant, would be pinned on me. Just because I am a god, someone would say, oh, why didn't you stop that tornado from hitting point A? While someone else would say, thank you for saving those caught in an earthquake in point B. Then if I had done the opposite, the same people would reverse their roles and blame me for not saving those in point B. Is it my fault that the Earth's plates shift, causing natural disasters? Naruto's fists clenched hard as he began arguing with the invisible people that were blaming him. Is it my fault that your governments didn't ensure that your buildings were structurally sound, sturdy against an earthquake? Am I to blame that underground shelters were not installed for your protection against tornadoes? Sooner or later, they'd question me on why I didn't save their relatives, friends, loved ones from a disease, a fatal wound maybe. I didn't interfere because when you give people something to push their blames to, they won't hesitate to do it." His unique eyes were glassy as he stared off into space, speaking about what was in his mind. "Eventually, a religious nut job is going to try to have me killed in some delusion, thinking they'd get rid of the false god. They'd fail and word would get out that I was unkillable. I'd be blamed for living forever, for having the gift and curse of immortality. Then the demands for me to bring the dead back to life would come. People begging me to make them immortal, getting upster furious if I were to turn them down, and then more would hate me." He gave a mirthless chuckle as the wrinkles on his youthful face became more pronounced. The bags beneath his eyes seemed to have darkened exponentially. "Ah, but don't forget that when they actually have to deal with a problem that may destroy all of humanity, they'll come crawling back and begging for help, forgetting that they'd had ever wronged me because it's my job to save them from total annihilation. Hey, I don't even need it to actually happen to see it because it's so predictable. I think I can see why Kaguya went insane trying to stop all those wars. She must be snapped under the pressure and just wanted to wipe everyone off the face of the earth in order to solve all of their problems for them." He allowed his head to fall onto Rias' bed, allowing the coolness of the soft mattress to comfort him. The little girl shifted over to Naruto, stroking the front of his soft hair with her tiny fingers. She was disappointed in herself that she had never noticed the burdens hidden behind the constant joy and happiness Naruto emitted. "I might be a god, but I can't solve everyone's problems." With that, Naruto closed his eyes, clearly exhausted from his long-winded and emotional speech. Rias had been nodding throughout his entire rant. She knew what he meant. If word ever got out that there was a god who could have stopped the world wars, or tragedies in general, from befalling, he'd be treated like Superman from the American version of manga, comic books. The Man of Steel was revered by people when he saved the day, feared and hated by the same ones who praised him when he did not. Perhaps it was for the best that he had allowed the world wars to take place, who knew? Perhaps the world would have changed drastically had Naruto interfered. It was obvious that a massive weight had been lifted off of his shoulders, something that had obviously been gnawing at Naruto for a while, and Rias could tell that what Naruto needed was someone he could lean on, someone who could listen to his troubles without judging him. He needed his best friend, and she was there for him just like how he was there for her. With a large yawn, Rias placed her head beside his, silently enjoying the way Naruto looked when he was sleeping. Now his eternal youth seemed to return to him, and was much more peaceful than he was a minute ago. She guessed that telling his feelings to her, someone who wouldn't judge him due to his status, had certainly disencumbered him from his guilt as well as got rid of the dark thoughts that had amalgamated inside of his head. As she began to fall asleep, Rias patted herself on the back for scaring Searsex earlier and locking the door. Now her older brother would be too afraid to teleport into her room, nor would he be brave enough to enter. She was sure that he'd tell Graphia, and everyone else for that matter, to let her wake up whenever she wanted to lest she use the red-hot habanero technique on him again. "Good night, Naruto, don't worry, I'll be right here, next to you." And so she shut her eyes, tiny hands buried into his lusciously soft but spiky hair. Right as her eyes shut, she fell into a deep sleep and failed to notice the soft smile that had formed on Naruto's face as he whispered softly to the quietly snoring girl next to him. "Thank you, Rias-chan." They were 4 words, but they showed Naruto's gratitude for letting him get rid of all of the weight that had been accumulating on his chest. Thanks for watching.